More than 100 countries seeking to ban the use of cluster bombs in conflicts gather in a Dublin conference. Boycotted by the biggest cluster bomb producing countries, what are the chances for reaching a binding treaty? And would such a treaty hinder humanitarian work or endanger military cooperation, as the United States claims? This is Inside Story. Hello, I'm Hashim Mahalbara. Diplomats from more than 100 countries are meeting in Dublin, hoping to agree on a treaty banning cluster bombs used in war zones to attack armoured vehicles. Cluster bombs scatter a shower of lethal bomblets over huge areas. Many of those bombs do not explode immediately, indiscriminately threatening the lives of thousands of civilians, similar to landmines. Bethan Howe has more.
They're designed to scatter over a vast area rather than be precision guided. This is the main criticism against the controversial weapon, the cluster bomb. Between 5 and 30% of the so-called bomblets do not explode on impact. Much like landmines, they cover the ground with the potential to blow up at any time, many maiming innocent children. It's believed there are thousands left in Kosovo, Lebanon and Afghanistan. Representatives from more than 100 countries are meeting in Dublin to discuss banning the use of the cluster bomb. But some of the world's main producers and stockpilers, including the United States, China, Russia, Israel and Pakistan, are against the ban.
The United States government under the Bush administration has basically told the rest of the world that they oppose these kinds of controls, and they want to have the unfettered power to produce, sell and use these cluster bombs.
Some countries, such as the UK, support the conference, but are lobbying for a lesser form of legislation as opposed to an outright ban. Despite this, Irish Foreign Minister Michael Martin has expressed his belief that any treaty would help prevent further use of cluster bombs.
The experience of similar type of international conventions, particularly the one on personnel landmines and so forth, is that once you set an international standard through a legal international convention and an instrument like this, other powers and other nations tend to follow that standard in practice. Although they may not be signatories in the beginning, they may not ever ratify such a convention, but ultimately it does determine international practice on the ground.
Inroads have been made towards agreeing some kind of global ban on cluster munitions. The conference has reached an accord that will secure medical help and support for victims. But the talks have yet to conclude how inclusive the definition of cluster munitions should be. And even if it does come to a decision by the end of the week, there are calls for a transition period before the treaty comes into full effect, leaving the opportunity for many more innocent civilians to become victims. Bethan Howe for Inside Story.
Joining us now, our guest in Dublin, Yasmin Ergas, Associate Director at the Centre for the Study of Human Rights at Columbia University. Also in Dublin, Raed Muqallad, an activist and a father of a cluster bomb victim. And in Tel Aviv, Miron Rapoport, an Israeli journalist at Haaretz newspaper. Thank you very much indeed, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us. Let me start by asking Yasmin in Dublin, can you give us a sense of what's going on now at the conference? Is it likely that this time the ban will be adopted?
Yes, I think it's very likely that this time the ban will be adopted. I think it's an extraordinarily exciting moment. There are still a few issues that are being worked out, but I think that we're really there. And I think that this is groundbreaking and hopefully will give us a safer world, or at least a safer set of munitions. So I'm very excited. I should say that I'm here working with Human Rights Watch as a volunteer for Human Rights Watch.
All right. Miron,
Human Rights Watch is among the organizations.
Miron, despite the terrible suffering caused by cluster bombs, countries like the United States of America, Israel, India, Pakistan, China and Russia decided not to take part in the conference because they are anti the ban. What are their justifications for that?
I can speak mainly for Israel, of course. Israel has a tendency not to join such treaties in general, not only for cluster munition. It says it can take care of its own security problems by itself. So it's not new that it doesn't does not join such a treaty. But I think Israel here still see the cluster munition as a weapon that is by the military is considered still needed, although in the last war, in the last Lebanese war, it's not really clear what have the cluster munition achieved apart from the making life impossible in many parts of South Lebanon.
In an interview with Al Jazeera, the Israeli President Shimon Peres admitted that using the cluster bombs on Lebanon was a mistake.
About the cluster bombs, to be short and clear, we committed a mistake. We regret it. Apparently it was done without the knowledge even of the Chief of Staff.
Let me go now to Raed Muqallad, and I'm sorry if this is going to stir some emotional feelings. Can you tell us exactly what happened to your son, Raed?
In fact, in 12 February 1999, we took my both son from the school to make a celebration for one of them on his 5th birthday in a public park. After we arrived and we prepared the food and the cake and 5 candles for Ahmad, and the kids went to play. After 5 minutes, we heard a big explosion. Then my wife, she screamed, "This is my son." I don't know, maybe she feels something bad happened to her son. And I'm hurry up to see what's happened. And first thing I saw my son Ahmad bleeding and have many injured in his body. We took him to the hospital. He suffered for 4 hours. After that, he died. Actually, I asked my other son, "What's you saw before the accident?" He told me, "Dad, I saw Ahmad picked up something like a color bottle from the ground." And many children in South Lebanon, they found cluster bombs like a toy. They dropped a cluster bombs like a toy.
Yasmin, the son of Raed is one of thousands who were killed by cluster bombs in the last few years. Is it because of the absence of a generally agreed upon definition of what's a cluster bomb that was the main obstacle for achieving a global consensus about the need to ban it?
I don't think that I mean, look, the absence of a global definition is one thing, but I think actually that the willingness of any army to use a means of combat that is so indiscriminate, that has such long-lasting effects, whose victims are so predictably going to be women and children and civilians, I think that there was a lack of political will, and that in itself, these means have been illegitimate for many, many decades. What we have done now is to finally get an explicit ban, or I think we're getting an explicit ban, on the use of a kind of weapon that ought never to have really been allowed and ought never to have been used. That's my personal view.
Miron, if the draft has been adopted in Dublin, is this something that can have the potential to push the Israelis to change their policy?
I think officially no. I don't see Israel changing its policy, and I even think that what President Peres told Al Jazeera, I don't think that the Israeli military would sign on such a declaration that it was a mistake.
So was he just playing lip service to the international community, or what?
I don't know. Sometimes President Peres is saying things that he thinks should be said. I don't know exactly on what ground. Anyhow, I do think, from my knowledge, is that the Chief of Staff knew exactly what's going on. It is impossible that such a wide use of cluster munition was done without the knowledge of the Chief of Staff. It's practically impossible. I tend to agree with Yasmin that the question is, of course, a political question, not a question of the definition of the type of arms and how it should be used. Here, officially, as I said, I don't see Israel accepting such a treaty, but the fact that such a treaty will exist, I think, will eventually maybe convince Israel to be at least more careful and in the use of cluster munition in the future.
All right. Let me go back to Raed Muqallad. Raed, since you started lobbying for the ban of cluster bombs, you'll obviously have witnessed many cases of political maneuvering, not based on moral grounds, but on strategic reasons. What was your message to people you've met in different places, like recently in Dublin?
My message for the peoples or the government?
The
Sorry,
government.
I don't understand the question.
Your message to the governments of the countries that use cluster bombs.
Yeah, I understand now. You know something, the government that was using cluster ammunition, they search in the world of treaty to find some way to make a new generation of cluster ammunition. The message is from me, don't search for a new generation of cluster ammunition. Must be stop produced and dropped cluster ammunition in all the world. This is my message for the governments was not came to this treaty.
Time for a short break. When we come back, we look at the history of cluster munitions in wars and ask whether they hold any military value in bringing a decisive end to wars. Back in a moment.